Welcome to Media Studies, Media History, Media and Society. Please note that I've attached a disclaimer that all content used in the slideshow has been used from our textbook and all images have been accessed from Google and should be referenced in accordance to the IE Harvard Reference Guide. For our prescribed material, please access the revised reprint indicated on the right, as it just has more information and examples than the one on the left. However, if you have already gotten this textbook, that is fine, but the revised reprint would be best, and it is indicated in your course outline. Please access your course outline, as this shows how we pace out the module. It has your assessments, it shows recommended readings, and you'll notice by each learning unit there'll be learning outcomes. And then you can use this as a checklist for your lecture to say, do I understand this outcome? Do I need to go back to this theory? Do I need to re-look at this effect of media studies? In our required assessments, this is a portfolio module. Task 1 and Task 2 is 10% each, and Task 3 and Task 4 make up the portfolio, which is 70%. This module will focus on 3 learning units. Learning Unit 1 is the history of South African media, being both print and broadcasting. Learning Unit 2 is the theory to the study of media and mass communication. And Learning Unit 3 is the role and functions and effects of media in society. Please be advised this is a VC Learn module, and you should be going onto VC Learn for your activities and additional readings on there to support your learning of the textbook. Learning Unit 1 is the history of South African media. Now you might be wondering, when was radio introduced into South Africa? When did SAB start? Was the government ever interfering in South African media? And are they interfering with South African media now, both in the past and the present? So in Learning Unit 1, we learn about the history of South African media. Here we have the history of South African media timeline, which goes from 1919 all the way to the present. Now, I'm going to tell all of this in a chronological, episodic sort of nature. The reason being is it's not going to be as effective to just go and talk about the period of challenge, the period of restructuring. It's way better for you to just sit back, relax, and let me just tell you a story about how it all began. So therefore, I'm going to tell it in order as if it is, the history of South African media. So you might be, I just want to also note here from the textbook that these are not the exact dates, but are a guideline to when these periods would have started. The whole point of this part of our work is broadcasting and how it was controlled and dominated by government and how SABC was introduced. So with that all in mind, let's learn about South African media history. The establishment of radio in South Africa began in 1919 with amateur broadcasters, them being John Samuel Streeter, Reginald Hopkins, and Sidney Innes. You may be interested to know that the first South African broadcast was music. They would use these sort of technology, quite old now, which is like the gramophone to help for the concerts and all that. And also on the right, we have this whole complicated technology there. And the audience would have to build their own receiver sets, known as crystal sets. So I want you to go and ask your grandmother or your great-grandmother if they had to build their own radio crystal sets and see, maybe they still have it. It's quite interesting to note that back then you'd have to build if you want to get the reception of, the radio there. Experimental broadcasts. So now broadcasting is being used for concerts, and here we have an image showing a concert to raise funds for the Empire exhibition from South African Railways. And I believe 16 concerts happened during there. The first regular broadcast. Now radio is becoming quite popular. Everybody wants to be a radio broadcaster. But the government wanted to control those transmissions and issued license applications, a license per urban area. So Cape Town got Cape Peninsula Publicity Association, that's what they call themselves, Durban City Corporation, and Johannesburg called themselves Station JB. So these licenses were quite expensive to have from the government, and therefore radio stations were in financial trouble. I mean, they did everything they could do. They even tried to charge a listener fee. And let's quite like be honest, there wasn't that technology to reinforce the listener fee, because if I want to listen to the radio, I'm going to listen to the radio. I'm not going to pay a listener fee. So the radio stations didn't know how to enforce a listener fee. And therefore, about 2 to 3 years later, all 3 radio stations closed. Isidore William Schleisinger, as you can see on the right, claimed all 3 expired licenses from Johannesburg, Cape Town, and Durban. He was approached about the radio concern and decided that he's going to create his own radio station, known as African Broadcasting Company, ABC. However, the ABC was still reaching its crisis point. They still had financial concern. They tried to enforce the listener fee, but it wasn't working. They tried everything. They tried, music and entertainment. They tried a morning exercise program, but nothing was working. And then finally, they tried the Blue Free voucher scheme. They went with a partnership to offer a discount where listeners could pay for radio sets, and then they could offer that to help pay the listener fee. So ABC would offer the radio set at a discount, and the listeners could use that discount if they want to pay the listener license fee there. The government believed that broadcasting for commercial purposes was just too important. It's too important just to radio broadcast and shouldn't be used for commercial purposes. Radio should have more potential. It should have more influence. So the government was not happy that ABC was operating as an independent radio station. Introducing John Reith. He's from the BBC, and he decided that, after investigation, South Africa is not happy about, the broadcasting, basically the government. And SABC and BBC should merge together as a public corporation. It'll be free of government control, political motivation, high quality programming, and the technical difficulties that you may have been experiencing would be resolved. Sounds too good to be true, if you ask me. ABC was not used to being monitored by the BBC, but through John Reith's debate with Parliament, it did also lead to the Broadcasting Act, and it formed SABC, South Africa Broadcasting Company or Corporation. SABC was not used to being monitored like BBC was. Government controlled by a board. The government, we have the right to control and manage the country's broadcasting. A new law was also introduced into the Broadcasting Act that if ever South Africa got television, would be provided with television, and should it ever get a television service, it would be controlled by SABC. I've also just added in here that Sanlam paid £150,000 to the new SABC. Note the pounds. Remember, we are still under British rule during these times. Broadcasting in Afrikaans. Now, the new act, the Broadcasting Act, was going to allow Afrikaans broadcasts. Back then, radio broadcasting was dominantly in English, but it was very problematic to introduce Afrikaans broadcasting because Afrikaners used to live in rural areas and the signal would not be able to be reached. Therefore, the solution was, let's introduce a shortwave service for Afrikaans listeners. The shortwave service, it didn't work. The signal would drop, distorted by thunderstorms. The listeners would have to make, frequency changes, and therefore Afrikaans listeners didn't want to tune in. Their retention just dropped and decreased, and we didn't have any Afrikaans listeners. However, in 1938, the Great Trek was a stimulus in the development of bringing back Afrikaans broadcasting. Now, this is not the actual Great Trek that happened years in the 1800s. This is just a reenactment, which is where The radio broadcasts are going to tell a story. And they chose The Great Trek. And the nation went crazy. We want to hear the Great Trek stimulus of, the story. And Afrikaans listeners, wanted to hear this story too. The only way the radio station could figure how to do this was to split the service into two. We're going to introduce a shortwave service for Afrikaans programming known as the B program, and English will have a medium wave service known as A program. And I've also just noted here that today they call for Afrikaans programming Radio Without Borders. In English programming, it's known as SAFM. So these are still around. (1948 to 1960). There is now a disagreement between radio stations and the South African press. Because if the radio stations already said the hot news, then why should South African press cover it in today's newspaper? You already heard it on the radio. Therefore, Station JB could only broadcast news that were already in the press. And I believe that this rule still exists. I could be wrong. Maybe you should go and Google that. But you see how our news, you would rather go into your phone on Facebook and look up the news quickly there than listen to the radio now. In 1936, SABC had no control, as you know from the BBC, because of what they could show and over content. They broke away and decided to create their own internal news department in 1950. This was the end of relaying news bulletins from BBC. Quite the move there. The Scott Commission. SABC began to experience financial difficulties. What did they think was going to happen? You broke away from BBC, now you're on your own. The solution was to use commercialization, sell advertising on air, and the Scott Commission was appointed to investigate SABC a bit more. Maybe we should tax 10% of their gross revenue. They need more high-quality programming. Maybe we should exempt SABC from paying tax. Maybe we should reduce the post office share of license fee. Anything, maybe some more advertising on the air. All of these suggestions was presented to the government to use, how can we help SABC become more stable? Obviously, the new nationalist government did not want anything to do with an independent radio station. He wanted a radio station that was pro-Afrikaner, pro-racial, and decided that a commercial should become part of SABC. We should expand the network and provide more Afrikaans broadcasting. Thus, Springbok Radio was launched as a bilingual commercial service. Now, Springbok Radio, I want you to go and ask your parents, because your parents will definitely know what Springbok Radio was. It was remembered for its cop shows, comedy shows, quizzes, drama. It was the program for the, 60s kids. However, it's quite sad because in 1985, the radio station had to close because it was unable to compete with the new technology of that time, television. Oh yeah, I almost forgot. Go into your lesson plan and I want you to listen to that clip, the last clip played by Springbok Radio saying goodbye to all its audience. It's quite sad. Introducing programming for Black listeners. During World War II, an unsuccessful attempt was made to provide nighttime programming for Black listeners. They used telephone lines in the compounds, hostels, and townships. It was mostly pro-English propaganda there anyway, and it was withdrawn due to costs. In 1949, they introduced once again a half-an-hour program transmitted daily on English and Afrikaans. 1952, a rediffusion services trying to get into those areas there with loudspeakers were hired, installation to subscribers at home. However, subscribers declined due to forced removals, and they were forced to move there. SABC was denied to offer broadcasting to all townships, but was prevented really by the government. In 1960 was a period of transformation. FM was introduced, And this was going to change the way you hear radio, better reception, more channels, and could be heard over a distance of 60 kilometers. FM was allowed for English, Afrikaans, Springbok Radio came back. There was also 3 new stations. And it was quite expensive to install new transmitters and antenna towers for these radio stations. Also operated on a strict program. So this would be one of our new technology developments in the period of transformation. The 3 radio stations began on FM from SAB Tower, now known as the Sentek Tower. It was followed by a Zulu and Sesotho service. The first regional radio station was Radio Highveld, second Radio Tsonga, and onwards. So as we're going through FM, more radio stations have an opportunity to open up. The second transformation would be station automation. And these radio stations I mentioned here in the slide were fully automated. It's quite cool. We have it now even today, which is that you're going to select exactly what you want, the announcements, the advertisements, the music, the news, anything you want, and it'll just click the button and it'll be in that pre-order. You know, it's just going to have all of those things kind of automatically playing day and night. It's going to reduce as well the cost of running a radio station, which is going to cut costs for SAB staff, which is why they lost their jobs. But this relieved the burden of introducing FM. The government did not like station automation because it interfered with the promotion of national interest to have a pre-selected order that they couldn't just jump in. Because it's like, no, I already have my order of, the day here. Automation allowed for great control, station management, and coincided with the national interests. And this caused bland quality to other radio stations who couldn't compete with station automation. African language service was introduced. A first scale radio station aimed at Black listeners with the introduction of FM, began with Sesotho, Zulu, and the program consists mainly of jive, jazz, and a lack of political content. In 1960, it was created that the Bantu Programs Control Board, controlled mostly by 35 white staff with knowledge of Black languages, which would avoid comments by government policies. Please see your recommended reading, which is also in your module outline. Okay, so what did you think about that part of your history? Quite interesting, isn't it? How radio was introduced, how SABC or ABC became SABC. In our next part of our video, we're going to go into a period of challenge and end with SABC as a public broadcaster in our early 2000s. I'll see you there.